Hello everybody and welcome to the 16th chapter in your Java EE7 tutorial series. In this tutorial, we'll be talking about configuring JSF applications. When creating a JSF application, we went over web applications, facelets, Ajax, and composite components. And these are good when creating small applications, but when creating enterprise apps, you'll need various additional configuration tasks. And these tasks include the following, like registering managed beans so that the application has access to all parts of it, configuring properly managed values and model beans that start when a page makes a reference to them, defining navigation rules for smooth page flow, and packaging the application to allow deployment on any compliant container. Now, to do this, we can configure managed beans and use annotations to configure these managed beans. We've shown a few examples of using annotations to configure managed beans before. And in this case, a bean that uses these annotations are called a CDI managed bean. Now, to use managed bean scopes, there are multiple. So the first is an application, which is our biggest scope, and it persists across interactions with a web application. Next, there's the session scope, which persists across multiple HTTP requests in a web application. Next, this isn't one that we use mostly, but I think it's an honorable mention. The flow scope persists during a user's interaction with a specific flow of a web application. Now, the difference between a flow scope and a session scope is that a flow scope only works during a certain set of pages that you can define. A session scope goes over every single page that's inside your application. Now, then there's the request scope, which is one of the smallest ones, which persists during a single HTTP request in a web application. And finally, there's the dependent scope, which indicates that the bean depends on some other bean. Let's say the bean is a request scope, so it depends on that request scope bean to create its scope. Now there's application configuration resource file. So one or more XML documents, the application configuration resource files, configure and register objects, resources, and define navigation rules for applications as well. They're usually called facelets config XML, and they're used to specify configurations not possible through annotations and to override managed beans annotations. Now let's go over something called eager application scope managed beans. So usually when you create JSF managed beans, they're lazily instantiated, which means that they're only instantiated when a request is made to them from the app. To create an instantiation, when an application starts and before a request is made, you declare an eager attribute, which goes ahead and wakes up your Mr. Managed Bean. And this declaration is as follows. So over here, you can see our managed bean eager is equal to true. In most cases, it's set to false, but in our annotation, in our in the Java class, you would put managed bean eager is equal to true. Next, there's the ordering of application configuration resource files. Since JSF Tech allows the use of multiple application configuration resource files, the order by which they are loaded becomes important. First, there's absolute ordering, where the files will be loaded exactly the way it is written. Next, there's something more dynamic called the relative ordering, which is based on the before and after sub-elements. The resources will be loaded the way that you say. So for example, let's say that we have our config A, which will be loaded before config B. It states that it wants to be loaded before config B. And config B, we have no idea what's going on over there. So let's say it has no ordering elements. And in config C, it says it specifically wants to be ordered right after config B. So that means the order will become config A to config B to config C, simply because of the relative ordering of the tags. Now let's take a look at facelets flow. JSF allows you to use a new kind of scope called flow scoped that is greater than the request scope but less than the session scoped. This can be used in series of pages in a checkout process in an online store. This creates a self-contained collection of pages that makes computation and packaging easier. Each flow has a start node and a return node. You can create a flow either programmatically or through the configuration file as we've shown before. So in this example over here, you'll take a look at these two figures over here. we can see how a flow would work in theory. In flow A, we have the start node called flow A, and its corresponding pages the user can navigate to, either next A1 or next A2. On the last page, the user can either choose to exit from the flow, or you can go and pass 2 parameters to the flow B over here. And flow B does the exact same thing in flow A. You navigate to next B1, next B2, and then you can choose to get out of the flow, or you can go back to this flow A. You can see there's also a few managed beans over here for flow A bean and flow B bean. Now let's take a look at this in action in our simple flow example. Okay, so now that we're in our NetBeans, let's go ahead, right click and click open project. And in your JSF, let's just click simple flow. Now this example provides an implicit flow definition by including an empty configuration file. A configuration file that has content or a class annotated at flow definition provides an explicit flow definition. And in this case, we can go ahead, open our web pages and go into our simple flow. We can go into the simple flow.xhtml. I know, terrible name. But over here, you will see nothing. It's because this, all it's doing is it's declaring a flow. And this is just needed for like your flow scope. All right, so this example is really simple. All it has is 4 facelets pages. So the first one is our index.xhtml, which has our title index page and a command button that allows you to enter the flow. And it goes to the simple flow.xhtml. If we double click that, we'll see that our flow starts off with the first page in the flow, and it'll ask you for your value and it keeps it in the flow scope. And then it'll ask you to go to the next page and it'll go to the simple flow page 2. If you go to simple flow page 2, here you'll see that this is your second page and it will output your value. And it will tell you to, if you want to return, and it will go to the simple flow return. Now here is a facelet that is outside of the flow scope. You can see over here, it's outside. So that means that whenever it tries to get the value of the flow scope, it should be empty because it's outside of the of the flow scope and it can't access this. And it will have a link to go back to your index.xhtml to go back to the start. Okay, so now that you get it, let's go ahead and run this. So let's go to our servers and right click and go ahead and start our Glassfish server. Okay, now that our Glassfish server is started, let's go ahead and click on build. And once we have our build successful, let's go ahead to our Chrome and output this link. Over here, you'll see localhost 8080 and simple flow. Go ahead and click that. And you will see an index page with one button called enter flow. Let's go ahead and click that. And now you are inside your flow scope. Let's go ahead and put in a value, let's say 5, and it will give you your value. And there's a return button that will go out of the flow scope, and it will try to get the value, but it's empty because it couldn't find it. And there's a link to go back to the start, and you can do it all over again. To really drive this in, let's take a look at another flow example in this checkout module example. Now that we're back in our NetBeans, let's go ahead and clean this guy so we don't have any background files, and right click and close. Now open your project and let's take a look at our checkout module and open that project up. So this is yet another example of using flows, flow scopes in our websites. So the first thing that I want to take notice is our index.xhtml, which it gives you 2 buttons over here. So you have our one button that has a checkout and it goes to the checkout flow, and there's another button that has the value join and it goes to the join flow. So you'll see that there are 2 flows instead of 1 flow in the previous example, and you can actually go into this join flow and then you would then end up to your checkout flow. So that means that going through the join flow, you can join, like for example the whatever you want to join over here, and let's take a look at its configuration file. Now, what's different about this is that our configuration file has stuff in it, which I know it's a lot, but it's pretty simple. All it's doing is getting two inbound parameters. So it's getting two inbound parameters, and it's getting two outbound parameters. So that means that it gets two things that it uses in its code, and it outputs two things to the checkout flow. Now, there's one thing that I want to take notice of. If we go to our checkout flow, you will see that this is doing the exact same thing that your join flow configuration file is doing. There's two inbound parameters and two outbound parameters, and your checkout flow is doing the exact same thing. So what it does is it uses Java code instead of your XML code, and it defines your flow definition, and it tells us that you have two inbound parameters and two outbound parameters defined over here. So you can pick whichever one you would like. If you're more into XML, then you can pick it the XML way. If you're more into Java, then you can pick the Java way. But know that these two do the exact same thing. And finally, one more thing that we want to see is our managed beans. So we have a managed bean for a checkout bean, which has all setters and getters, and another managed bean for our join flow, which has also its set of setters and getters. So now that you got that, let's go ahead and we have Glassfish server started. So once you start Glassfish server, let's go ahead and click build. Okay, so now that you got your build successful, let's go ahead and put this link over here. So our localhost 8080 checkout module. Go ahead and enter that, and you will see two buttons over here where you can either check out and go straight to the flow scope, or we can take another flow scope and we can meet this checkout flow scope in the meantime. So let's go ahead, let's try to click join, and you can go ahead, let's say you wanted to join Duke's fan club, and let's take his quarterly thing, and you can either exit the flow or you can submit it, which lets you go into the page 2 of the join flow, and it says thank you, and you can go ahead to the checkout or you can exit the flow directly. So let's check it out, and let's put in some stuff. So let's say Viprov 1234 some street, another street, and you put in everything else, and you can go ahead and click continue, and it will ask you to see if the information is correct. And you can go ahead, go back actually and change something else. Let's say I don't live in this zip code. Let's say I live in this zip code, and I can continue and make sure that that's correct, and continue. And you can put in a credit card. So let's say Master Visa 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10, and expiration date, let's say it's 05 20. All right, so let's try to submit that, and it will give you an error because you actually need to put 16 digits instead of 10. So let's put in 6 more. 1 2 3 4 5 6. So submit that, and it will say thank you for your order, Viprov, and your order will be billed to Master Visa. And you don't really have to worry, that's not an actual credit card, so it's not doing anything over there, but you understand what it's doing right now. And you can go ahead and go to the join flow, or you can go ahead and exit the flow. And you can exit the flow, and now you're back to your exit page. And that's it for this example. And before we forget, let's go ahead and clean this guy. Really important that you want to do that, or else there's going to be stuff going on in the background. And you can go ahead and close it for the next project. Okay, so now that we're back in our slides, let's go ahead and check out configuring managed beans. So there are different ways to configure managed beans, like you saw in the example that I've shown. You can either use annotations, or you can use managed bean creation facilities or XML files. So the pros of annotations is that it's much more modular. It allows for quick configuration right in the code of the Java class, and it's closer to Java code, which is great for Java developers. And then there's the managed bean creation facility or XML files, which creates beans in one centralized file that is available to the entire application, rather than conditionally instantiating beans throughout the application, customizing a bean's properties without any additional code, customize a bean's property values directly from within the configuration file so that it is instantiated or initialized with these values when it's created, and using value elements to set a property of one managed bean to be the result of evaluating another value expression. Now, let's take a look at this example of using the managed bean element. So, this example is from the application configuration resource file from Duke's bookcase study. And over here, you can see that we have our managed bean element, which is used multiple times over here, which either can be used to like set the eager to be true, set the book name, class, scope, property, and so much more. Then there's configuring navigation rules. Navigation rules dictate the pages a user can navigate through. It can either be implicit or they can be explicit, defined in the application configuration resource file. So over here, you will see that each navigation case describes what page they should go to for any different outcome. If it's successful, then you go to the storefront. If it's a failure, then you go on to the log on. The from view ID over here tells us what pages the navigation rule applies to. Now, when an application developer creates a custom render, it must be registered using the appropriate render kit. In our case, that kit will be the HTML render kit. You register the renderer either programmatically through the @faces render annotation as described in the previous chapter, or using the render kit and element in the application configuration resource file or the facesconfig.xml. Just a reminder, attributes specified in the facesconfig.xml file will override any configurations done by the @faces render in any other managed beans. So to register a component, custom component, it is similar to registering a custom renderer. You can either register a custom component programmatically with the @faces component, or through the application configuration resource file of the component element. Again, anything described in the component element overrides anything in the @faces component annotation. And in this case, we have our component type, the name under which the component is registered. It is used to refer to this component again. The component class, which specifies the fully qualified name of the custom component, and the property, which specifies the component properties and their types. And that wraps it up for this tutorial, everybody. I hope you understood what you can create by using a JSF application and registering much more tasks than previously before. Now that you understand that, let's go ahead to the next video.